Are you a monoculture person or a multicultural person? I guess you could be a little blend in between there. Though, for white people who are monocultural people, we always constantly hear that we're somehow bigoted, we're somehow privileged, we're somehow oppressive to not want to embrace multicultural things. There are endless examples of literature that claim that you are somehow a bad person and should be punished for not embracing other people's cultures. It is just the oddest thing to me. You know, the people who push this the hardest being the left, and some people call them progressive, some people call them neoliberal, some people call them outright Marxist, socialist, communist, whatever. They have this weird thing whereby they want to celebrate people and help people find, their happiness, their joy in life. It's why they claim to support transgender children, because they're going to find their happiness in life. It's why they support drag queens and the story hours and stuff. Just let people be happy. Unless you are a person who wants to exist in a monocultural state of existence, that's your happiness, that's your American dream. No, you're somehow a bigoted person. And I was accosted on Gab the other day, like I have been on Twitter so often throughout my tenure of my many Twitter accounts, by someone who's just insisting that I'm a horrible fascist, Hitler, Nazi racist for appreciating my culture. But I'll tell you, just what prompted me to make this video. Just last night, I went to my nephew's baseball game. 7 years old, coach pitch baseball. An hour and something up the mountain. Deep up the mountain. I live now, in my adult life, I live in the valley, in the Shenandoah Valley, which is like if you took a mountain holler and stretched it out. It's still a valley. It's a southern valley. It's not like a Silicon Valley, so don't get that twisted. We went way up into where the hollers are at, way up deep in the mountain. And there's a 10 to 15 boys on the coach pitch baseball, all 7-8 years old. All of their families show up and their friends show up. So there's more than 100 people there at the park. And every single person is white. Every single one of them. Every kid's white. Every parent's white. Every extended family member, every friend that shows up, it's white. It's just a bunch of white people. And I'll tell you just one thing, and a lot of people can say this is racist, and oh well. I feel comfortable there, and I feel at home there. And I'll tell you the juxtaposition where if I go see baseball here in the Valley, where it is not like a New York level of multiculturalism, but there are people from other cultures and other races and other ethnicities there, and it's just not the comfortable, homogenous, high trust setting. And it's not that I hate those people or I get a vibe that those people hate me. And it's not that we have any real tension around each other. It's nothing like that. It's just that what do you talk about? What do you really have in common? And I know the multicultural people like pushing the idea that, well, you have to see what you have in common. But you know what that most likely leads into is like the Black Lives Matter stuff and the white people are oppressor stuff and the white privilege and all of that kind of stuff is what that kind of stuff leads into. Don't you want to be comfortable in life? Don't you want to be happy in life? Talking to all of the people there, the game went into extra innings, so we were there for like 3 hours and a half, and my brother and I went around talking to all kinds of the other people and the parents, and that's where he lives, so he knows a lot of them. He's friends with a lot of them. You know what they talk about? They don't sit around and talk about what the left claims Southerners talk about. They don't talk about, oh, we got to keep these N-words out and we got to build a wall and deport them all. Nobody even talks about politics or nothing. Yet they talked about, hey, how do you mow your grass? I got 3 acres. Well, I got 2.5 acres. I got a Husqvarna zero turn. Oh man, how good is that on gas? Then they talk about, do you got problem with weeds? Are you able to get the hay baled all right? Because there's a whole lot of cow farms and stuff around there. What is the price of meat going up to? That's the kind of stuff they talk about. They talk about how their kids are doing at school and stuff. They don't talk about anybody else. And you know why? Is the rest of the world doesn't need to exist to them. They're a homogenous little community. And most of the people have been there generationally. They've been mountain people. Their parents were born and raised in the mountains, and their parents were born and raised in the mountains. And they all know each other, and they all get along, and there's very, very, very little crime at all. Crime there would be like somebody drunk driving, or somebody, going into a car and stealing your smartphone if it was there. And even that is very rare. There's no violent crime. There's no rape, assault, and murder and stuff like that. And I'm not even putting this down to race. I'm just putting it down to the homogeneous, however you want to say it, nature of the people in these communities. And for me, I mean, that's my culture. That's what I prefer. These are my people. We've been here all our lives, and we have the accents to prove it, and our customs and our traditions and the way that we go about treating each other and the way we live our lives. And the idea that you're supposed to sacrifice this and invite other people with an outside culture into your culture, it's cultural displacement. You want a glass of tea, okay? That's what you want. You want a glass of tea. How many drops of soda are you going to tolerate someone putting into your tea until it's no longer tea? I know for some people that might seem like it's a bad analogy, false. It's not analogous, but for me it is, because that's what culture is. Culture, you got that balanced glass of tea there in your culture. And how many drops of something other than the tea are you going to allow someone else to put in before it's no longer tea? You can say, well, what's another family movie there going hurt? Nothing. It's just culture is genetic. You have to understand that. By and large, when we count in the aggregate, let's forget the not all X are like that fallacy here. People practice their culture through behaviors, and behaviors are largely genetic. So there's nothing wrong with a family moving there, but then another, and then another, and then another. And what you have are people practicing a culture that is nothing like your culture. And I can speak to this firsthand experience here in the Valley. We have on the street 1, 2, 3, 4 black families and 2 Latino families, comprising about, 35-40% of the people who live on the street. And it's not that they're bad people. It's not. I'm not saying that they're bad people. I'm not saying, they're bringing crime and ruining the property. I'm not saying any of that. But when I want to go out back to listen to some music and smoke some meat, 3 houses up from me are the Mexican family that have concert PV speakers that are set up permanently out back, and they blast mariachi music so loud you can't stand it. And they have this little like makeshift homemade grill out of boxes and stuff, and they fry this stinking meat. And I'm not saying it's offensive, and I'm not saying they're bad people for doing that. I'm just saying that is their culture that they're practicing. Okay, now what's the problem with that? Okay, now imagine that the majority of the people who move there become those Mexican families. That's the culture that thus sits in now. That's what takes the place of what used to be mountain culture, southern mountain culture. What is the problem with keeping your culture homogeneous, with wanting to celebrate your culture and exist within your culture? Why do you have to know about someone else's culture or speak to someone else about their culture? If you want to do that, no one has ever tried to stop you from doing that. At least not where I'm from, at least not in my experience, 40 years on this planet. I've never seen no one stand in the way of other people wanting to embrace other cultures. Nobody's stopping anyone from moving to New York, Chicago, LA, down there with crazy Florida, man. Places that are racially, ethnically, culturally diverse. I never see anyone trying to stop that. It's always just the other way around. If you have a homogeneous culture, that you live somewhere in the suburbs, somewhere in the prairie lands, the flatlands, the swamplands, in the Appalachia region where I live, the Midwest, there's always some advocacy group, some politician, someone somewhere trying to force people from outside of your culture into your culture. And they do it on the premise that you're somehow bad for existing in your culture. The culture you have is somehow oppressive to others, especially if it's white people. There's just privilege in that culture. You know, there's no new cars in the parking lot. Most of the cars are beat up pickup trucks. Most people have jobs where they have to work. They can't afford to take off. They have to work or they don't pay their bills. These are kids out there who, a lot of them have secondhand cleats, and people, you know, pool their money to get the kids uniforms and stuff. It's not a wealthy culture. It's a humble mountain culture. But the people, by and large, when they get together for something like that, there's just peace there. And like I'm saying, it's not that other people you're going to view as outsiders and you're going to feel trepidatious or anything like that around them. It's just, what do you have in common with them compared to your own people? There's nothing wrong at all with existing in a place that is comprised of your people, and trying to intrude upon that is a political caliphate. It really is, and it's cultural genocide. I'm not being hyperbolic in the least with that. There's no other way. Go back to the example of the Mexican and the mariachis and the black folk across the street. Every weekend, they got these big driveways in front of their houses, and they live in adjoined houses. I don't know if they're family or know each other or not, but they get together and they roll their windows down and pop their trunk and they play that bass music. And hey, I'm not mad at them about that. They're having a good time and they're not really bothering anyone unless you're sensitive to that kind of, you know, music in your ears. But they're not aiming to hurt anyone. It's just, that's not the culture we have here. That's the culture they bring in with them. And when I say culture, yes, I'm speaking more about the mutable pop culture sort of thing. But their behaviors that drive them to want to celebrate like that are entirely different than our behaviors here, where, you know, we might get a couple guys together with acoustic guitars and get out of everybody's way and go sit out back and drink a couple cold beers and just smoke a hunk of meat and just enjoy life and talk about the weather and chat a little bit about women, as long as they're not around to hear us. And it's just not like that when you bring in people who bring those different cultural behaviors into your area. And at some point of proliferation, your culture ceases to exist and their culture is the dominant culture. And taking that away from people is criminal. It really is. It should be criminal. We go back here in the Appalachia generations. We didn't take any slavery money and decide to build enclaves of white privilege. People who exist in these hollers, these are people who were driven up into the mountains because of slavery. They didn't have no camaraderie with their white brethren back then who were rich. They wouldn't give them jobs. So they chased them up into the mountains. And my people have been in the mountains now for hundreds of years. And the fact that someone from the outside would view that and say, no, you need to be culturally enriched, is just, it's genocide. It really is. You're stealing away people's happiness, people's cohesion, people's culture. And at some point in this world, people are going to be tired and not care that you call them fascists for wanting to exist in their own culture. And the left is going to have a big mess to clean up that is 100% of their creation, because all we want is to be left the fuck alone.